Hi everyone, Dell here. Really sorry I can't be with you in-person class today, but hey, you get a fun little video to watch instead. I'm going to go through some basics today in how to use selection tools in Photoshop, which will be really important for the first mini project that you are going to do in this course. Before I get started with that, just a few reminders. Remember that when you want to use the computers in the computer lab, you need to log in with your Fort Lewis email and password. If it's a new machine that you haven't used before, you may also have to use that information to log into Photoshop. For those of you who are not Mac super lovers, I just wanted to go over a couple of things about using this platform just as reminders. So you will remember in Mac that we have our desktop here, our main sort of functioning program for the Mac is called the Finder. So if you click anywhere on the desktop, it's your basic landing spot for Mac. Usually on a Mac, on your computers anyway, you have this thing visible. Mine's hidden just to give myself a little more screen space. This is called the dock, or what do we call it? The fun bar? Yes, the fun bar. This is where all of your current apps that you've put down here to use a lot, files that you might have open, live. It's kind of the equivalent to the start menu on a Windows machine. In addition to the dock, which is a place you can go to navigate to find different things in a Mac, you also always have this program bar up here at the top of the screen. This will have functions that are specific to whatever program you happen to be selected on at any given time. So right now I'm in the Finder. I can see that it says Finder here at the upper left, and it's got specific functions or commands that you can give the computer that are related to the Finder. If I switch to another program, for example, if I go into Safari, one of the browsers that comes with Mac, then you'll see that this changes to Safari up here, and the options for that program will change based on what the program that you're in does. Some other things about Mac. We can, let's see here, looking at my notes, we can search for stuff on a Mac. So last time, let me go back to the Finder. We use this Go menu to look for common spots that you might tend to go. We also have a spotlight search up here at the upper right, the thing that looks like a little magnifying glass, and you can search for things. You see the last thing I searched for on this computer was Photoshop. Whatever you type in here, it will give you a kind of a search of what's on the computer and also give you links to online activities. But in this case, let's just go ahead and double click Photoshop and it should open up that program. You can see the little dock icon bouncing down here. I had a teacher as an undergrad who hated that animation. He would say it always reminded him of like a hyperactive Jack Russell Terrier jumping up and down. But it's just to let you know that the program is opening up. So here we have Photoshop open. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that while I talk about a couple of other things. Remember, the minimization lives up here in the upper right. One difference between Mac sort of functionality and PC or Windows functionality is, if I'm not mistaken, in a Windows machine, when you click this little red X, it will shut the program down. In Mac, it will just close the window. The program will continue to be open. But if you want to just get it out of your way without closing it, you can hit this little yellow button, boom, and it zooms down here into the Mac, and then you can get it back by clicking into the dock again. All right, anything else I'm missing? Oh yeah, the big one. Those command, control, and option or alt keys that are different on a Mac than they are on a PC. So if you're used to using Windows machines, the command key or the Apple key is equivalent to control. So anytime you would hit control on Windows, you will hit the Apple key or the command key on Mac. Option is the equivalent of alt, and then control on a Mac computer, it exists on the keyboard, but it's really usually only used for certain things. The big one being right clicking. So if you have that white mouse that it's difficult to right click with, you're going to hold control, you're going to right click on something, and it'll open up that contextual menu like the one you see here that lets you do some more things. Right clicking is most handy for us because we're going to do a lot of things where we borrow images off the internet, and oftentimes when you do an image search, you'll right click on it and then find the command to download it. Okay, hopefully you're getting used to the Mac. You, of course, are welcome to use Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, any Adobe program on the Windows machine too. We just use the Mac in the classroom because it is the industry standard for graphic design and art purposes. And talk a little bit about Photoshop. We went over some of this in very general terms last class, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page about what this program is and what it does. So Photoshop was developed as a photo editing and manipulation program, but of course it has become so much more. It's used for digital illustration, for painting, for animation, for all kinds of things. It is, as we talked about last time, a raster or a bitmap program, which just means it builds its images with pixels. And pixels are tiny little fuzzy edged squares. And when you put enough of these together, you get the sense that there is a smooth range of colors. Photoshop and all bitmap or raster programs are really great at color blending, but the fuzzy edges do mean that they are dependent on what we call resolution, which is the number of these pixels that we have in a certain space. The higher number of pixels, the sharper something will look as it gets bigger and bigger, but the bigger the file is. So there's always a trade-off with these things. All right, so if you've been following along and you searched for and opened up Photoshop, you've probably got a window something like this. Some of you may have that kind of introductory what's new in Photoshop window. You can go ahead and close that. Generally speaking, there are many ways to find and open apps. Like most computer stuff, you'll hear me say this over and over again this semester, there are multiple approaches to anything we do. So find the one that works for you. And I am always open to hearing like cool ways that you found to get into something. But we opened it through Spotlight Search. You could also do the Go menu. You could have it in your dock. You can, in the Finder, usually there'll be a list of recent items under this Mac menu right here, so you can open something that's been recently opened that way, however you want to get to it. So let's go ahead and start out opening with a new file. The new file button is up here on the left. You can also, if you're selected in Photoshop, go to File, New, and then you'll see all of the options for what a new file can be. You can use ones that you've used recently. You can see I've done lots of custom ones. You might have certain saved templates that you're interested in. They also have some preloaded templates for things that they think are standard photo sizes, print sizes, art and illustration sizes, and so forth. I am just going to start out with something fairly simple here. We'll just go to the print and choose letter. You can see that it pre-populates with everything for a letter. And last time we talked a little bit about this resolution button. It's set at 300 by default because most people make something on a letter size piece of paper to print it, and that's printing resolution. We could change it to what we did last time, which was 72 or screen resolution. But I'm just going to leave it as is right now. Go ahead and click create. And we end up with this lovely white rectangle. Woohoo, go on us. So looking at Photoshop, some things to remember about it. We have our working window here. Let me make this a little bit bigger so it's taking up most of my screen. We have this window here, which is kind of our canvas area in which whatever we're working on will live. You can actually grab this little tab up here and pull this out. Some people like to have their canvas like floating or separate from what they're doing. I'm not a big fan of that. So if I don't want that, I'm just going to slide it back until I see that blue line, and then it will just snap back into place. We also have our toolbar here on the left, which we played a bit with last class. This is where all the tools in Photoshop will live. If you hover over them, you get that tooltip that tells you what it is. And just remember that each one of these tools, if they have a little caret down there in the corner, a little triangle, it means that they have some other tools sitting underneath that tool that can be used as well. So you just either click on that. Let me show you here. I either click on it and kind of hold, or click and pull to the right, or sometimes right clicking will do it. Whatever, again, whatever functionality works best for you. In addition to the toolbar here, we have a contextual tool menu that'll appear up here. And when I say it's contextual, that means it changes based on the tool you've chosen. So if I have, for example, the brush tool, you're going to get things that are specific to the brush up here. Whereas if I have the vector shape tool, you'll get things that are specific to that. At the very top of the screen, just as with the Finder, we have our program menu. And in Photoshop, it's got your basic things like File and Edit, but it also has specific things for Photoshop. We'll spend a lot of time in this semester in the Image menu and in the Layers menu. Generally speaking, the program menu is for big commands, like overall program commands, but we can drill down within Photoshop and get lots of specific commands too. Again, multiple ways to do anything. Oftentimes something that you can do through that program menu in Photoshop, like we played last time with creating new layers, I can do it here through the layers menu, but I can also do it over here in the panels. So it's really what you're comfortable with. All right, what else about what you need to know about how Photoshop is laid out? Usually on the right-hand side, you have some kind of panel set up. These are all various groups of panels. You can see that there are different tabs at the top here that have um, usually related sorts of things going on here. We have color in different types of ways to approach it. Down here we have properties, adjustments, and libraries, layers, channels, and paths. These things are all kind of related. We also have this little bar here that has not full panels, but kind of ones that you can pop out to the side. And you can add extra things to this by going to the window menu and choosing something else that maybe you want to have a little bit more visible. So I can do this, and you'll see that it appears over here on the right. Now I can get to my shapes panel if that were something I wanted to use. You can change the size of each one of these parts. You can grab any of these tabs and pull them out and float them around, or move them into another tab group by dragging and waiting until you see that blue line. I'd recommend you just spend a little time grabbing stuff and messing with it and seeing what happens. And how you like it. I can expand this toolbar into a double row or get it back into a single row. But whatever you do, you can always go back to default by going to the window menu up here, which controls kind of what we're seeing on our screen, and setting the workspace. So this entire thing here is our workspace. And there are different defaults for kinds of workspace. So if we were doing photography, for example, we might want to choose this photography preset. I personally like the Essentials, which is the default Photoshop setup, and it's the one to me that just has what you need pretty simply without too much clutter. You feel free to play around and figure out what you like. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and reset Essentials because I messed a bunch of stuff up. And if you ever come in and things are totally jacked, this is the way you get it back to some degree of normalcy. All right. One other thing to know about Photoshop is whatever file you are working on will always be kind of titled right here. And if you have multiple ones open, it'll be like the tabs in a browser. You'll have one after the other here, and it will tell you what the name is. An interesting thing about this little tabby here, so let me just grab this brush and I'm going to give this a color. Right now this is white, so I'm just going to switch the background and foreground colors so you can actually see what I'm doing. And make this little circle here. You see the little star, the asterisk that appeared here? That means that I have made changes to this that have not been saved, okay? That's important because, as we talked about last class, you want to save early, you want to save often, because you do not want something that you've labored on really hard to crash. So to save, you can either go to the File menu and select Save, or you'll notice the keyboard shortcut listed right here, Command S. Will save your file. When you do it for the first time, you'll get a window that looks something like this one. It's telling, what do you want to save this as? Right now, I just saved something else for a different class in a weird way. So I'm going to go through how to change the setting. But just as I'm going to name this, I don't know, tester test. My God, I got the caps lock on. I'm yelling at y'all. And then I'm going to just save it on the desktop. There we go. And I'm going to choose just a regular Photoshop file, which should be the default for you all. It's just I was doing something else on this computer. So I've got tester test. You can see it says at the end of this PSD, that stands for Photoshop document. It's the native file format for Photoshop, and it's what we're going to be working on most of the time. If I click save, you'll see that now that little asterisk, dang, that's a hard word to say at 7:41 a.m. in the morning. That little star is gone because this is fully saved. And I can see, since I saved it on the desktop, here it is, my tester test. You remember that little trick I showed you for viewing what something is without actually opening it in a program? If I select it and I hit the space bar, it'll zoom up big and I can see, man, in all its magnificence. This is like some serious minimalist art I've created here. Okay, so what I would love you to do at this point, since we've kind of gone back over what's in Photoshop and where, is to go into Canvas, into our course module on Canvas. So here's our week 1 course module. And you should see that there are a couple of other activities that have been created, these couple of activities right here. Go ahead and click on this one that says Class Activity 116 Photoshop Basics Review. And it will give you a list of steps that sort of recreate some of the things we went over during our first class when we made our hamburger, but it's just a chance to remind yourself of how to find different tools, how to make basic adjustments with them in the tool menu. So follow these instructions to make this beautiful composition that it will lead you to. When you're done with it, you will save it as a Photoshop document, and then you'll just kind of put it aside. We're going to submit these assignments to a certain spot on Canvas a little bit later. So go ahead and pause the video, do this sucker, and then when you're ready, come on back to me and we'll talk about selecting in Photoshop. Okay, how did it go? Hopefully you were able to get all of those steps done, or at least did your best. As I said, you're going to save that file and just put it aside for now, and we'll come back to it when you're turning things in at the end of this little remote lesson. But we're going to move on to talk about selections in Photoshop. So being able to target select different objects within a file is one of the key functions of Photoshop. That allows you to move things around, to manipulate them, to change the color only in a spot. Just targeted editing really is what it allows you to do. Selection in Photoshop is a massive thing. I mean, there are so many different ways to select something in this program. It can vary from a simple one-click process to something that you're carefully tracing around an object by hand. It really depends on what the needs of what you're doing are. All right, first things first. We are going to be practicing on an image. So as beautiful as this tester test thing is, we're actually going to go for a specific image with what we're doing here. So if you go back into Canvas to the week 1 module, you'll see that there is another activity, the selections practice activity right here. And if I click on this, all it's going to be is a photo, okay? But you're going to download this photo and then we're going to end up opening it up in Photoshop. So to download it, you'll see that there's this blue bar up here that says download practice photo. Just click that and it's going to go up into your downloads if you're in Safari like I am, and then I can just grab this thing and take it onto the desktop. If you can't find it in here, you can also, let me move this stuff out of the way a little bit so we can see what we're doing. I'll go back to the Finder. And if I go to the Go menu to Downloads, you remember how I organized things last time by date added? So that practice photo is the last thing I added on this computer. I can grab it and drag it out onto the desktop. You can work out of the Downloads folder. I just like when I'm working on things to have them on the desktop so it's easy for me to see where they are and I don't have to go down into subfolders. Personal preference. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that and pull Photoshop back up here. Okay, so now that the file is on your desktop, we are going to open it up in Photoshop. And as with most things in this program, again, it's a broken record with me. There's a lot of different ways to do it. In this case, however, I'm going to show you one of my favorites, and that is simply to click and drag and open it in the program. Now, you're going to be tempted to want to click and drag it and drop it here, and you can do that, but I find that sometimes it does some strange things with like resizing the image. So I prefer to do it at a program level. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this photo, I'm going to left click on it, hold that click down, and then I'm going to drag it down on top of the Photoshop icon on the dock until it changes color. Do you see how the icons are changing color or changing value as I hover over them? I'm going to go over Photoshop. I'm going to let it go. And it's going to take a moment, but then it should open right up in Photoshop at the actual size the image is. So again, I grabbed it, I dragged it down, I put it over Photoshop until Photoshop highlighted, and I let it go, and here it is. As long as you can get it in here some way, you can also, if that's too hard for you, you can right click on the image and open with Photoshop. You can go in Photoshop itself to the File, Open menu, and select the file here. I mean, like I said, tons of different ways to do it. Okay, now that we've brought the image into Photoshop, you may want to resize this image so it's a little bit bigger or smaller, particularly if yours came in something like this size. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but this view menu up here in the program menu at the top has our zoom in, zoom out functions as well as different set sizes. So for example, I can choose fit on screen and it'll zoom it up as big as I can get it. There's a keyboard shortcut that's helpful to know. It is Command plus and minus that will zoom in and out. So I'm just going to hit Command minus to zoom this back out a little bit. To set us up for what we're doing with selection today, I'd like you to go ahead and create a duplicate layer of this one that we're working on. This is just good practice in Photoshop. As I mentioned last class, one of the strengths of this program is that it is non-destructive, which means that when you are working in Photoshop, you can always maintain the integrity of the original and you can put everything that you're altering on top, which means if you screw up, you can go back to the beginning, which is really, really nice. Sometimes we get tunnel vision and it's hard to see how the changes we made are actually affecting things. So to make a new layer, or a duplicate layer rather, I can either select this and go up to the layer menu at the top and choose duplicate layer, or I can click, hold, and drag on this down to this little plus sign, let it go, and you'll see it made a copy that says background copy. Remember what I said last time about naming? Really important that you name your layers. So I'm just going to switch this right now and I'm going to call it working layer because I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with it, but that just gives it some kind of set name so I understand what its purpose is. This background layer is now locked, but this one isn't, and I can tell because of the little lock symbol here on the right. If I want to hide one layer or the other, I can turn the eyeballs on or off. Well, you'll notice nothing happened there because these two layers are duplicates of each other, but this is really handy once we start making alterations so we can say, I like that or I really don't like that at all. So, as I said, selection is going to be our focus today, and we're going to talk about a bunch of different tools that you can use. One of the simplest is one that we used last class, and that's the marquee tool. So the marquee tool lives over here in the tools. Second one down, it's the one that looks like a shape with dotted edges. By default, the rectangular marquee is usually the one that's up, and that's the one you'll most commonly use. But if you click and hold or right click or click and right drag, you'll see that it's got other options. Some of you may still be on the elliptical marquee because that's what we use to make our hamburger bun. Go ahead and select the rectangular marquee so you can see the tool previewed here. To use this tool, you simply find where you want the corner of the rectangle to start, click, hold your mouse button down, and drag it out to whatever size you want. So say I wanted to put something else in this area, and I wanted to make sure that I kept it just in this area. I can make this rectangular marquee tool. Last time we talked, for example, about the paint bucket. So if I wanted for some reason to fill this area with a color instead of having it be blank background, I could choose that. Remember our color picker down here where we can select different colors. Notice what happens when I bring my cursor off the color picker. Do y'all see that little eyedropper thing? So if I wanted, for example, to fill this with a nice yellow, maybe I'm making a poster and I'm going to put text over it, I can go ahead and click on here and select some of the different yellows that are in the image. So I'm getting a nice match for it. So I'll just use that yellow and then I can pour that in. You see what happened here? This is just because there's some texture in this that is preventing that from filling totally. So I can keep clicking on it, or I could leave that and say, ooh, that's a cool texture. That's what we call a happy accident. If y'all ever watch like Bob Ross and his Happy Little Trees on PBS, I love the happy accident. So we're just going to leave that as a happy accident. If you hated it and the paint bucket just isn't working for you to fill in that texture, I could also go to a paint brush. I'll keep the same color. Whoa, that's a huge brush. So I'm going to use my square bracket to make it down, and I could paint over some of those things as well. Okay, so those are the marquee selection tools. Again, just clicking where you want it to start and then dragging out to size. Do you remember what button we hit to constrain the proportions? In other words, if I wanted this to be a perfect square instead of a rectangle, what do we do? Well, first I have to deselect this sucker, so I can do it through this toolbar, or Command D is the keyboard shortcut. That's another one that it's worth knowing. So I've deselected my marching ants. Let's say I wanted another square here. I select my rectangular marquee. Rectangular marquee. That's a tough one too. Click and drag, and then I hit the Shift key, and it will constrain it to a perfect rectangle. One other thing about the marquee tools is once you've selected something, you can actually, without deleting it or doing anything else with it, you can move it. So if I select something in a rectangular marquee and then I click this here, this is our move tool, I can put my cursor inside here, click down, and I can move that section. Do you notice how it doesn't appear like anything changed? Can you think why that might be? If you're feeling really clever today, you may remember that we have two layers and the one on the bottom is identical. Well, look what happens if I turn off the visibility on that bottom layer. Holy hole in the ground, Batman. So just be aware that sometimes, like if you're thinking you move something around and it's still there, go check your layers, make sure you see what's visible. And while I'm talking about layers, just remember that you always want to make sure you are selected on the layer that you want to be working on, that it's highlighted light gray over here. Otherwise, sometimes what happens is people do something like this. They've got the background selected. Let me deselect this. And then they're trying to move something around. So I grab my move tool again, trying to move it around, and there's like nothing's happening, or you get this error. It's because this background is locked. Just make sure you're on the layer you want to be working on. Okay, so marquees are obviously general selectors, but there's lots of ways to select more complex shapes as well. So let me deselect what I have here, Command D. And I am going to go down to the next tool down in the queue, which are the lasso tools. Right now mine's set on polygonal lasso because that one happens to be my personal favorite. But if I open this up, we also have just the regular lasso tool, and that's what I want you to put on the screen first. This tool, the lasso tool, is a free-form selector. It's kind of hard to control when you're using a mouse. So if you have a drawing tablet with a pen, it's a little easier. If you have a shaky mouse hand, however, you're not going to get super clean selections with this. But what it is something where you can, again, check that I'm on the working layer. Boom. You can make whatever shape selection that you want. Okay, so I'll deselect that. So I could try, for example, to select this lemon. You see I'm doing a bang up job of it. It's a little bit of a rocky tool. Where it's really good is if, say, you have somebody who has a little bit of a dark spot on their shirt. You can kind of do around that dark spot and then use like the dodge tool or something like that to just clean up that area a little bit. So it's sort of for a rough personalized shape. Deselect that sucker. The next one in here is the one that I said I really like, the polygonal lasso. So the way the polygonal lasso works, and I actually want you to try this one out, is you'll find a place to start. I'm just going to go on this picture here. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see this better. So I'm going to find a point on this picture and I'm just going to click. And you'll see that it's hung from an anchor point now, and we've got a straight line that's kind of swinging back and forth here. The next time I click it, it's going to leave that line segment that I just clicked in place. So I can click multiple times. And if I'm doing fairly small lines like I am here, I can get a fairly accurate representation of what the shape is. So again, I click, I pull it out to wherever I want it to go next. I click again, I pull it out, click again, and so forth. And you can get reasonably accurate selections for things that aren't, like hair or something like that. That would be kind of my personal nightmare. When you get to the end, so you'll see that I have a little gap left here. Photoshop helps you out because it could be kind of hard to line things up personally, but if you watch my cursor carefully, as I go over the end of this other line segment, do you see how the little icon for the tool changes? It gets that circle next to it. That indicates that you want to close the loop. So if I simply click one time, that'll close the loop, and then I have this perfect shaped selection according to the polygonal lasso. I use this all the time to clean up a selection, to select a simple geometric shape. It's really great for that. And oftentimes I find it faster and more accurate than some of the AI tools that we'll talk about in a minute. For now, I'm just going to deselect this. Underneath here, there is another one that I want you to be aware of. I find it of limited use, but just know it's there. It's the magnetic lasso. It used to be Adobe's super hot, like brand new tool, but it's sort of been replaced by some other things. But the way this one works is you click on something and then I'm not holding down my mouse. I just clicked in one spot and then I'm sort of dragging along close to edges. What it's supposed to do is it's supposed to sense the edge and then stick to it. But you can see it's variable. Did a pretty good job at the top of the pot, and then we got down to where there's very low contrast between the pot and the background, and it went haywire. So again, it can be used in a pinch, but I don't think it's the most modern of the selection tools anymore. By the way, any of these selection tools like the polygonal lasso or the magnetic lasso where it's dropping individual points like this, if you do something like I did and you're like, oh no, I hate this, I don't want this, I don't want this selection at all, escape is your friend. If you hit the escape key, it all goes away and it's like it never happens. Nobody needs to know. It's our little secret. Let's go ahead and go back to our polygonal lasso for a minute. So we're going to try to select this leaf right here using the polygonal lasso, and I'm going to show you one other sort of set of tricks and techniques that go with all selections. So pause the video and take a moment to select this leaf with a reasonable degree of accuracy. I don't care if it's 100% perfect. Your life and fortune does not depend on this activity. But when you've got the leaf mostly selected, come back to me and we will go from there. Okay, how did you do? So here is my selection. Magnificent. This is like one of those baking shows where they have the cake already done in the oven. I've got my selection going here, and if I zoom in, Command plus, you'll see it's not bad. Not bad. I did reasonably well getting around the edges, but there are some places that I messed up a little bit, like here on the tip of the leaf, for example, and sort of down in this area. So the nice thing about Adobe selections is you are not married to what you did the first time. If you mess up a little bit, you do not have to stop and start over again. You can always add and subtract. So to do that, you need to know a keyboard shortcut, and that is either Shift or Alt. If I choose Shift, you see that there's a little plus sign that is next to the crosshairs of my tool here, the place where I can kind of see where I'm clicking. So let me switch it to how you are seeing. I had it in crosshair mode. Remember, if you get crosshair mode instead of the brush, it means your caps lock is on. So you see the little lasso here, and then it's got the plus tool next to it. If I hold the shift down while I click and I close a new loop, and then I let go of the shift key, it will add on. Again, hold the shift key, see that plus there, click, then you can use the polygonal lasso as normal, let go of shift, and you've added on to your selection. If you have areas like I have kind of on the upper edge of my leaf where I kind of have some things that go outside the border and I want to subtract it, same basic process, but instead of hitting the shift key, you're going to hit the option key. Now I have a little minus sign next to my lasso, and I can go along here, go outside. It doesn't matter at all what I do with the outside because I'm just trying to get rid of those bumps. And then I let go, and you'll see it erase those little peaks that were sticking over the leaf. So refining, adding and subtracting, hold down the shift key and click in order to add stuff on, hold down the option to erase some stuff from your selection. All right, now that you've got that leaf selected, let's play around with what you can actually do with a selection. So I mentioned that you can move it by grabbing this move tool here, putting your cursor somewhere within the selection and then moving it over. If you have your background layer hidden, you'll see that now it's blank behind here. What else can you do with it? Well, let's say I wanted to make some sort of weird thing out of this lemon that I cut here and with leaves all around it, like a little headdress or something. I can actually copy and paste this, and it's the same as like in a word processor program. So the keyboard shortcuts are Command C and Command V. If you can't remember that, copy and paste almost always live under the edit menu up here. So copy, Command C, paste, Command V, and you should see that there is another layer that appeared over here in the layers palette just called layer 1. Other than that, it doesn't look like anything happened at all. Can you think about why that might be? Hopefully it makes sense to you that this just pasted on top. And if I go back to my move tool, make sure my layer 1 is selected and move it, now you see that I have multiple of those little leaves. Other things that you can do with your selection, with the move tool on, we talked about this a little bit last time. If you go outside the borders near the corner, do you see how the cursor changed to sort of two little arrows going up and to the side or down and to the side? If I click and hold and then pull my mouse with that icon visible, I can rotate things. I can also grab the corners of the box here and I can make it smaller or larger. So as I think you can probably see, I could fairly quickly, just going to duplicate this layer here, fairly quickly start to get this little headdressy pattern kind of thing that I want going on here. Okay, so some basic transformations can easily happen with selections. When you copy and paste or when you duplicate the layer, you will always get another layer on top. You can already see it says layer 1 copy. It gets really to be a nightmare if you're not renaming things. So do that. I also want to point out that anytime you do a transformation, like I've turned this to the side, Photoshop's not going to let me do anything else until I confirm that transformation. So here is a button that you can click that says done, or you can just hit the enter or return key and then it will change back to like a regular rectangular border, and now Photoshop will let you do other things. So I'm just going to name this leaf top and leaf side, not because I'm going to do anything with this, but because I'm trying to model being a good citizen of the digital world. And you can see I'm selected on left side right now. That one is highlighted with a blue bounding box. If I switch to this one, now that one is highlighted on a blue bounding box. Remember that when you want to move something, transform it, color on top of it, do any of those things, you have to have that layer selected. All right, last group of things that I'm going to make you listen to over a video today, and that is the AI or smart assisted selections in Photoshop. Photoshop increasingly has automated methods for selection, which will work well in many, many instances. Almost all of them can be accessed via this fourth tool down right here. Now mine is on the quick selection tool. I'm guessing most of you have an icon that looks like this, the little square. That's our object selection tool. And again, click and hold to see the other options that are under there. So let's start with our object selector. I'm going to go back to my working layer. So I want to be selected on my main layer, and I'm going to make sure the object selection is highlighted. It looks like a square with a little arrow in the corner. And the object selection tool does exactly what it sounds like. It selects objects. I mean, I don't know how to say that in a more interesting way than that. Most of you probably have this little thing clicked on by default, the object finder. So when you select the object tool, it's going to do something that at first seems absolutely bananas. With this on, when you come over it, oh my gosh, look at that. Like it's going to start highlighting it with all these crazy pink outlines. This is just the smart part of Photoshop trying to tell you, hey, I think there's an object right there, or I think there's an object right there. So let's say that you want to try to select this table. I can hover over it and it's simply as easy as going boop, and there it is. That's what Photoshop thinks the selection is. As you can see, it's not perfect. It did pretty well on this side, and then I got kind of confused by what was going on over here. I could hit Shift key and add to the selection by clicking over here. I could also go up to one of my previous tools, hold Shift key and refine so I can mix and match my selection tools to get the selection that I want. Okay, so that is how the object finder works. It also has some kind of drill down capabilities. So let me deselect that for a second. You'll see that right now it's got this object finder on. If I want to be more targeted, like let's say I want to try to just get this flower that's over here. I don't want the whole pot. I can turn off the object finder and go over here to mode and choose the lasso tool. And I can do even just a super crappy outline. Like I don't really care about getting all that close. I just want to have most of it inside this lasso. And then the AI will say, okay, she says there's an object in there. Let me see if I can figure it out. You see, it did a pretty good job. I'm going to move this over. If you hold down spacebar, you get this little hand tool, and you can move over within what you're seeing, just so I can zoom in, Command plus, to see that selection. It didn't do too bad. If I get close, I can see there are a few areas it didn't quite get in. Selection tools, especially the automated ones, do better when there's a real high contrast between the color or the value, and you can see these colors of the flowers in the background are kind of similar here. But again, I could go back to like my polygonal lasso, hold down Shift, so you can use your polygonal lasso again, for example, to just clean up those areas. There we go. Had the wrong key held down there. So I can get like a cleaner selection if I want to. Very rarely does an AI tool get it 100% perfect. All right, so now that we have this selected, go ahead and make some kind of transformation with it. You can choose your move tool. You'll see that'll highlight it with a bounding box. Let's say I wanted to make this bigger. I can just click the corners and I can make the flower bigger. I could paint on top of it if I wanted to, like we did last time. I could put my rotational tools up here. I could squash it and stretch it a little bit. One weird thing about Photoshop selections and making things bigger and smaller, do you remember how when we were doing our like rectangular marquee and I told you hold down to Shift to constrain it? The only place in Adobe where that is not the case is for some reason Photoshop changed it so that when you have a selection like this, it will automatically keep the length and width ratio. It won't squash and stretch it. But if you hold down the Shift key and then you grab it, it will let you squash it and stretch it. I don't know why they did that. This is a change they made a couple of years ago. Super annoying in my opinion, but that's what's going on there. Under the same automated thing, we've got our quick selection tool. Our quick selection tool works like a brush that you can brush into a certain area and it will try to find the edges of that area and select it. So you'll see there's a circle with a plus sign, just like a regular brush. I can make it bigger or smaller with square brackets. And then if I click, it'll basically paint in selection. Okay, so as much as I want to select or deselect, again, just click, paint it in, and it will try to find the edges. It doesn't do the best job when there's low contrast, but when there is, it's great. The default for the quick selection is add, so you actually don't have to hit shift to add more stuff with this, but it is the same to take it away option will remove extra selections that you don't want. Okay, so I could command X, cut this out, and command V, paste it in somewhere else, and have, partial flower parts floating around if I so desired. So you've got the basics. What I'd love you to do is spend a little time playing around with this photo or another if you'd rather work on something else. Try using the lasso tools, the marquees, or the AI tools to cut out, move around, and resize a few things. Make something ugly like what I made on the screen. And when you're done, you're going to go ahead and save it. Give it your last name, me and my caps lock, and then say underscore day 2. Let's call this one day 2-2 because it's our second exercise. I'm going to save it to the desktop, save. I'm going to leave it in Photoshop document format. Let me minimize Photoshop here for a minute. So now I have 2 things I made. You will have made your by the step practice exercise 1. I'm just going to rename this day 2-1. So you'll have 2 files, your last name day 2-1 and -2. They're both PSDs. You can tell that because of the 3 letters at the end. When you're all done with that, you'll go back into Canvas, boom. And I haven't done it yet, but I promise I will before tomorrow. In this module, I'm going to add in a little submission spot for you to put in your art, your 2 files. That's what gets you participation for Thursday. I give you up until the start of class on Tuesday to get this done. You do want to know what I covered before you come into class for Tuesday. But that is definitely enough talking at you from me. Hopefully this all made sense. Hopefully you are having a great first week. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday.